Good morning, everybody. It's Thursday. We are at Yechezkel Perek Tetvav, chapter 15, and we are entering into a stretch of more parables that Yechezkel uses in his prophecies. We've previously seen more kind of physical action on his part, and now we're going to have a number of parables. In fact, a little later on in chapter 21, we will see, just turning there in my Tanach, we'll see that Yechezkel says to God, Aha Adonai Elohim, Hema Omrim li, Halo mimashel mishalim hu. The people says, "Oh God," kind of a sighing sound. "Oh God," they say about me, "Halo mimashel mishalim hu." He is just a good translation in the JPS, a riddle monger. Meaning this, don't take this guy seriously. All he's just making up these parables and these riddles. So that's a dismissive stance that the people take towards Yechezkel that's bothering him, but it descriptively points out to us that at a certain stage in his prophecy, he becomes perceived as someone who uses the tool of parables, and we haven't seen that much yet. But we're going to see much more of it in the coming chapters. Um, we're about to see an extended parable of a vine. We see parables of other features of nature, eagles, trees, fires, and other things. So that's kind of a feature which is going to characterize a lot of the next 10 chapters or so of Yechezkel. So we're preparing ourselves for that. And this one, which is a parable that has to do with grapevines, is situated interestingly in a wide range of grape and vineyard parables across the Tanach. So we may take a look at a few of those along the way. And let's jump right into the chapter. So I'll share my screen. Okay. Um, recall that last chapter 14, we had, this sort of two parts discussion about the elders coming to Ezekiel to seek God's word, and his response about, not following false prophecy. And when you seek out a prophet, but you've already committed yourself to idolatry, then you do get an answer from God, but it's not an answer that you want. And then the second half was this whole repetitive frame about all kinds of punishments that would be meted out, that even righteous people would only be able to save themselves. And so, too, when God punishes Jerusalem, either there will only be a very few righteous people and they will only save themselves, or maybe there will be no one righteous, and therefore those who are saved are not even the righteous ones, but they're ones who are saved just to tell the tale of the consequences of wrongdoing. Heavy stuff. And now we shift to heaviness through a different lens, which is the lens of the parable. So let's see. Ellen, do you want to read for us?
Sure. All right. The word of the Lord came to me. O mortal, how is the wood of the grapevine better than the wood of any branch to be found among the trees of the forest? Can wood be taken from it for use in any work? Can one take a peg from it to hang any vessel on? Now suppose it was thrown into the fire as fuel, and the fire consumed its two ends, and its middle was charred. Is it good for any use? Even when it is whole, it could not be used for anything. How much less when fire has consumed it and it is charred? Can it still be used for anything? Assuredly, thus said the Lord God, like the wood of the grapevine among the trees of the forest, which I have designed to be fuel for fire, so will I treat the inhabitants of Jerusalem. I will set my face against them. They escaped from fire, but fire shall consume them. When I set my face against them, you shall know that I am the Lord. I will make the land a desolation because they committed trespass, declared the Lord God.
Okay, so a short chapter, as we said, and we have this parable in which the message from God here, sometimes it's explicit that God is telling Ezekiel, go tell the people. Here, we don't see that. We hear the question is for Ezekiel himself, and the answer is given to Ezekiel himself, and there's never actually a clear instruction to go deliver that message anywhere, right? So just let's review the basic text, then we'll look at some of the other context of this parable across the Tanakh. So God, the word of the Lord came to me. Ben Adam, our usual introduction for Ezekiel, mortal, son of man. Um, Good simple translation here. How is the Eitz Hagefen, the wood of the vine or of the grapevine, better than the wood of any branch amongst the trees of the forest? And can it be used for any work? Can you make a peg to hang a vessel on, right? And this is generally true, that as wood goes, the wood of grapevines is not very strong, sturdy, or useful. Now, let's say you throw it into the fire. Hine la'esh nitan la'ochla, to be consumed, and its two ends are consumed, and the middle is charred. Is it good for any use? Right? If when it was tamim, when it was whole, and of course tamim already kind of hints to the application of the parable, because we could have chosen perhaps a different word like shalem or something like that, but tamim already evokes a moral character judgment, right? If when it was whole, that's a simple description of a piece of wood, as opposed to being burnt. But we can also apply that to human beings in a sense of innocent, blameless, you know, faithful is sometimes the way tamim could be applied when it's used in conjunction with people and their relationship with God. Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha, really be kind of wholeheartedly faithful to God. So, if when it was blameless and whole, it wasn't useful for work, certainly once it's been charred and the fire has consumed it, is there any use for it left? Right. So that's the parable that Ezekiel is being presented. Think about the wood of a grapevine. It's not good for any use, and once it is burned, it's all the less useful. Okay, lachain. We certainly have that lachain many times in God's communications with Yechezkel, but sometimes it's therefore go tell the people, and sometimes it's still internal. Therefore I say. And so this is of that latter kind. After you think about this parable, now we're going to get the application, and it's just a conversation between God and Yechezkel. Therefore, so says God. And again, is Yechezkel expected to deliver this message, or is this an internal discussion? So says God, just like the wood of the grapevine amongst the trees of the forest, which I have designated as fuel for fire, so will I treat the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Meaning, the wood of grapes, because it doesn't have any better use, it's particularly designated for fire. And once you start burning it, then you just keep burning it because it's certainly even less useful once it has begun to be burned. And so too is my way that I'm going to treat the inhabitants of Jerusalem, meaning implication somehow being they've already shown themselves and God doesn't, Yechezkel doesn't spell out the application here quite as explicitly. It's a little bit left for us. And is that because it's obvious? Is that because God doesn't want to have to say it out loud? But the implication that's not made explicit is the weakness or lack of utility of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, right? They are like the wood of the grapevine because they don't seem to be good at doing any other roles, jobs, or tasks. And so all that's left for them is to be relegated as fuel for fire. And by the way, in one of the podcasts I sometimes listen to in preparation, the podcasts of Rabbi Alex Israel, his Tanach podcasts that you can access from the 929 webpage for each chapter. And he lives in Gush Etzion in Israel, and he comments that you often see the Arab farmers that are their neighbors in Gush Etzion, once they have finished harvesting the grapes, the grape vines are collected up and used for firewood. And so, that's their only remaining use, and that therefore is what they're designated to be used for. So the inhabitants of Jerusalem, again, implication, are worse off than less useful than any other kind of wood of a tree in the forest, and therefore they've been designated for fire. And once the fire begins, there's nothing to do but to keep burning it. And so God says, and we've seen this term a lot in the previous chapter and before, I will set my face against them. They escaped from fire, but fire will consume them. Consume them. We'll try to come back to that and understand what does that mean. They escaped from fire, but fire will consume them. And then when I set my face against them, you shall know that I am the Lord. Again, that's been a repetitive theme, in especially last chapter as well. This is about making God's identity, God's vision of justice known. And I will make the land a desolation. There's a little sort of play here. Bisumi et panai, when I place my face against them. V'natati et haaretz shimama, and I will make the land a desolation. A little bit of a, vocal similarity between sumi and shimama. Ya'an ma'alu ma'al, because they made the land, they committed a trespass, declares the Lord God. Again, we don't see Yechezkel being told to go tell the people this. Maybe part of that is because he's in Babylonia. So how does the message, what's the point of this message to Jerusalem? But even still, telling the Babylonians what's going to happen, is that expected or not, is not made totally clear here. But we have this parable. And again, I want to come back after we're taking some initial comments to this question about what does it mean that they escape by fire, but fire shall consume them. It seems to be related to the fact that the parable begins by saying, let's say it was thrown into the fire and the fire consumed the two ends, and the middle is charred. Is it good for any use? No, you have to keep burning it. So we have to think about what that means. But I want to pause here for any initial questions, comments, or reactions. Estelle, I see you, but you're still muted. You think you can unmute? Let me see if I can send you a message to unmute. Good, we hear you, Estelle.
No, it's just that I got in on Rabbanit Bracha's thing, and then when it came out to you, it wouldn't put me in. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, I'm sorry about that, but you're here now, and we're just underway, so don't worry. We've been,
Okay, thank you.
of course. I'm glad you made it. Sorry for any difficulty.
Thank Ellen for me. She sent
Okay,
it.
thank you, Ellen. Great, good teamwork. Graham, go ahead.
Let's see. Am I on? Can you
You're
hear
on.
me? Okay. Yeah, I looked it up, and if the vine is burned, the ash is I asked, and found out it's rich in minerals like potassium and calcium. So, and its pH is slightly acidic, which I say I'm probably going out like, what the heck is he talking about? I'm listening to myself. It's but the pH is slightly acidic, which is perfect to fertilize new vines. So, because grapevines need a slightly acidic soil to grow best. So the ash of burnt grapevines matches up perfectly with the new vines, what the new vines need to grow best. So there's kind of a hidden benefit even in the worst punishment.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful take, beautiful insight. The text stops short of making that kind of positive association at the end. So I like that add-on, whether it was intended or not. It's somehow, baked in is the idea that out of the ash will be born some kind of renewal or new growth. So it's a lovely insight. Thank you.
But it
Ellen?
will only perpetuate the bad vines. I mean, he's already said that um, that the people are useless in
Hmm.
that they're grapevines. So burning it is only going to perpetuate that. It's not like you can use it to fertilize something else that the
Mm.
forest that grows that's useful.
Okay, great. Okay, a good counterpoint. And this is always a great exercise in testing the limits of parables. Right? So we can ask the question, was in comparing the Israelites to grapevines, or actually we should say the wood of the grapevines. It's an important distinction. We'll try to come back to that. To the wood of the grapevines, where the text was the Eitz HaGefen, not the Geffen itself, but the Eitz HaGefen, and comparing the Israelites to the wood of grapevines, um, for the purpose of saying they aren't useful, or they've proven themselves not to be useful. They're worthy of destruction, and that destruction has to be kind of almost complete or complete, even though it's never complete. um, is the implication, because that's the nature of grapevines, is the implication that that's the nature of the Israelites, or this group of Israelites behaving this way reminds me of the wood of grapevines, but if they would repent, then I would compare them to something else. So I think it's a good question. What are the limits of the interpretation of the parable?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fair point that if we stick with the parable, then if the ash only gives way to fertilize the next generation of the same thing, what's the help? Or is there a way for there to be a exit from that cycle? Yeah, go ahead, Alan. I've still got you
Um,
spotlighted.
I'm interested in when you said that it's make sure that you understand it's only the wood that he's talking about. And that made me think that perhaps when leaves or grapes spout from the wood, that then there's a use for it. And
Yes.
so that's more to the point of hope than um than the ash.
Yeah.
It's that it's that even a grapevine can sprout and become something that's useful.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do think that that is somehow subtly present here.
Mhm.
And I want to, if my computer will comply, being a little slow right now, I want to try to show us a couple of other places um, where the grapevine parable comes up. Hold on a moment.
I'm sorry, Stephen, but
Yes,
since
Estelle.
I didn't hear the beginning of this, but why are they always tending to make the general population of Israelites negative?
Yes.
That's my question.
Timeless and difficult question. And either, as we've sometimes said, either it's because the intolerance for idolatry means that even if some people are doing it, it's sort of the response is disproportionate because even the tiny amount is intolerable. Or maybe it seems to indicate that the kind of community of idolaters was more widespread than we would want to imagine, and that kind of everybody to some degree was complicit in it. I don't know that we have that we have clarity about that. But it's a good question because it certainly seems like everything is, being brushed with that same stroke. Just appreciating Leela's comments in the chat, both on the parable of the fire, that we are kindling for God's fire, and fire finds them, and on that comment of, they got out of the fire, but then they will be consumed by the fire. Fire will find them wherever they run, even in safety, which is only temporary. And then the comment on idolatry that it's sort of like contagious, and spreads quickly to others. Okay, so just going to share my screen again, to kind of broaden out the intrigue of this parable by looking at a couple of other grapevine parables. So in Judges chapter 9, the people are in need of a leader, and they turn to Yotam, and he gives them a parable. Once the trees went to anoint a king over themselves. They said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said, am I the worthy leader, basically? They go to the fig tree, come and reign over us, and it says, who am I to go and wave above the trees? They say to the vine, go and reign over us. And the vine says, who am I? So the grapevine is certainly considered not the least amongst the trees, but one that's, worthy of being considered as a leader, um, and not relegated to the corner. But again, that's because the role of the grapevine in that parable, or the way the grapevine talks about itself, is that it produces the wine. So we again bump up against this differentiation between the wood, which may indeed have minimal use, and the grapes, which are useful. Just looking at a couple of other things. In Isaiah chapter 5, so this is, only just a few years ago that we learned it together.
Right.
There is this beautiful Mashal HaKerem, the parable of the vineyard. And there's a description, a song for my beloved about his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a fruitful hill and broke the ground and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines, hoped it would yield grapes, but instead it yielded wild grapes. And God asks, what more could have been done for my vineyard? Why did it yield these wild grapes? Now I'll tell you what I'm going to do to the vineyard. I'm going to sort of make it vulnerable to destruction. And we find out the parable quite explicit. Ki kerem Hashem tzavakot Beit Yisrael. The house of Israel is the vineyard of the Lord of hosts. God, lovingly tended to it, and hoped for, justice, that is good grapes. But instead, injustice, that is wild grapes, came out of it. So we have that, and just note one more. Sorry, that's not loading. We have this one, the parable of the grapes as a kind of a metaphor for spouse and family in Psalm 128. Your wife shall be like a fruitful vine within your house, your sons like olive saplings around your table. So we have these various places, and certainly, grapes and wine are amongst the most, cherished, fruitful, metaphors for, or even descriptions of, the prosperity and productivity and fruitfulness of the land of Israel. And when a vineyard produces good grapes, that's like the ideal state. If we go back to that parable in Isaiah, God will invest in a vineyard because of the grapes it will produce. So when we come back to our chapter and we see, the focus on the wood, I think, that idea that the grapes should have been produced, but they weren't produced, and therefore somehow all that was left was the wood, and the wood is useless, seems maybe to be what we're getting at, that the Israelites were viewed as having potential to produce something rich, nourishing, that has, religious connotation and, source of gladness and enjoyment. But I think we have to somehow imagine that those grapes never even blossomed, or they weren't what they were supposed to be. And then we were left with only the wood, and the wood on its own is useless. And so maybe kind of that's the underlying dimension of the parable, because we ask ourselves, when we look across the Tanach, we see lots of positive associations with vineyards and grapes, that God is somehow saying here, you're supposed to produce something. If you don't produce the thing that you're there to produce, and it's just the, in potential that's not realized, then there's nothing, useful there. There's nothing worth saving there. And that, I think, is a kind of a really powerful and fascinating comment. And even thinking about Israel as the vineyard of God, etc., I think, without going too far, or too homiletical, I think there is kind of a message here that I want to that I think about sort of in terms of chosenness, right? That we are God's vineyard. We have this special, unique relationship, however we characterize it. But internally, we understand ourselves as chosen, elected in some way. That's because of what we have the potential to produce. If we don't produce it and we're only looking at our innate selves, just like the body of the Jewish person, that doesn't have any greater utility or value over and above anything else. And in fact, if it fails to produce what it's there to produce, it almost becomes a greater disappointment than others. So I think that reading, when we focus on the fact that it's specifically the wood of the vineyard, and that the vineyard is such a positive thing generally because of what it can produce, then maybe that's sort of a way to read this. God is sort of saying, when you don't, achieve your potential and bring out into the world what you're meant to bring out, and I'm looking only at you, devoid of activity or action. Now, this certainly cuts against uh, other ideas we have in the Tanakh of God sort of just loving the Jewish people just because we are, special to God. But this is a different take, I think, that, you part of how we're evaluated is what we do. And if we don't do anything good and it's just God looking at us devoid of actions and productivity, so to speak, then the utility is limited, maybe even ironically sort of worse than others. And then the question is, okay, we're just left for destruction. Again, that final conclusion is always a hard one to swallow. But that's sort of the reading I want to offer. I see
Well,
Leela and then Arnie.
hey, thank you for that.
Sure, sure.
I was thinking about this idea of producing, which really makes sense because we can't just be consuming. It's like an animal that's just being fattened up to be slaughtered otherwise, and it makes sense that God would destroy because of what Graham said about the ash containing the minerals. So you can actually just burn down a field, anything that's contaminated, burn it back down, and then it will be almost rejuvenated with what is required for growth afterwards.
Beautiful. Yeah, very, very resonant. Thank you. Arnie and then Estelle.
I have a question and a couple of quick comments.
Great.
Um, when Ezekiel talks about Jerusalem, or God talks about Jerusalem, is that symbolic of all of Judah, or is it just Jerusalem?
Great question. I lean towards assuming that it's all of Judah, but we've seen it show up in different ways. Sometimes they're identified with each other, and sometimes they're potentially separate. So I think it's still open to interpretation.
And in terms of what Estelle said, I'm still troubled by that. But one thing that I found very helpful was when we looked at Heschel, and Heschel said, few are guilty, but all are responsible. And the sense of Jewish community is that all are responsible for making sure that the community is healthy, thriving, and whatever Jewish ideal we're talking about, that it's a Jewish community. So that was helpful to me. And then in terms of a lot of the other comments, the temple burned. At the time that it burned, the Jews were warring among themselves within the walls of protection against the Romans. So they were being very unchosen, let's say. They were acting in a very unchosen way. But from the destruction came diasporic Judaism and the Talmud and great thinkers and um, borrowings from other cultures. So it was a flourishing like nothing ever imagined at the time of the burning.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a harsher example, but the Holocaust and the burnings in the Holocaust were terrible, terrible, terrible. But not that Israel necessarily was an outgrowth only of that, but it surely helped world sympathy to create the state of Israel after the Shoah. Um, and it even continues to this day, hopefully. Um,
Thank you. Yes, it's that question of kind of the flourishing of diaspora in the wake of destruction seems kind of unaddressed by this chapter. Um, and I think in general, it's a fascinating question. What is the Tanach's view of diaspora? I mean, it seems generally uh, undesired. And yet we've seen so many extraordinary things come from diaspora. So, I think it would be a fascinating study, which people have done, kind of what are the different dimensions of the view of exile inside the Tanakh, and then in later, developing across Jewish history and Jewish thought. So, totally appreciate that, Estelle, and then Carl.
Well, what I'm sort of thinking of when people say about Jews should always watch out for the others. What about those who are mean well but are incapable of following through as God anticipated or wanted them to? And if they're incapable, why should they also be punished or shoved aside? I I mean, granted, speaking of the diaspora, I mean, everybody knows what Jews have contributed in this country, all the music and whatever. But when you think of the thousands of people who most Jews are incapable of doing extraordinary things, so why should they be included? That's what concerns me.
Say it one more time, Estelle. I'm not sure I got the question.
The question is, why should the Jews be uh forced well put upon if they, I mean, just like ordinary other people, if they're just incapable of following the tenets of what God wants the Jews to do, just as being ordinary people like all the non-Jews.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the standard of expectation which is placed upon us uh,
That's what I object to.
fairly or unfairly. Um, yeah, and it's the complex nature of a transgenerational, you know, covenant. Um,
Is it right?
yeah,
Is it the right thing to be or to do?
it's a great question. It's a great
Wow.
question.
So,
We're going to go to Carl and then Graham.
Okay, I'd like to comment on Arnie's comments, and let's start from the end, which also was raised over here. If you look historically, what happened, we have the great advantage of hindsight. Okay, and so a lot of the Jews were exiled from Judea when the Babylonians destroyed it. And then compare what happened to the Jews who were left behind, and there were, and the Jews who went to Bavel, right? In Bavel, they succeeded. They were a wealthy community. They were well integrated, and the Torah was kept alive in Bavel. Right? Ezra and Nehemiah came back. They were people of importance in Bavel. They came back to Israel, and they found not just desolation, but complete ignorance and not didn't have any knowledge of the Torah. So you have this irony. History has shown us an irony. In some sense, it was the people who were exiled who flourished. These are the ones who were supposedly being punished, and the ones who stayed deteriorated from the future perspective. So that just makes the irony even stronger.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I also like to bring up that question, when he mentions Jerusalem, who is he talking about? Again, I have recently we've been looking also at Yeshayahu, and they're only talking about Jerusalem. I mean, when Sennacherib was coming and attacking Jerusalem, he destroyed the whole rest. He conquered all the other cities of Jerusalem, of Israel. Okay, and so they were destroyed. They weren't redeemed. And it was only Jerusalem that was saved. So it seems to me that when he's talking, when Yechezkel's talking about Jerusalem, he just means Jerusalem. He talks about the temple, and that's the center, and not as a political entity, but just as the city itself. And they say complete disregard in all the prophets of the people around them who were both the population. So
yeah, very interesting, and it is particularly specific here when it says Yoshvei Yerushalayim, and so whether it's referring to Jerusalem and its environs or really just Jerusalem, and if Jerusalem, is that reflective of that just being the most central, most kind of defined home of God, so to speak, and or therefore an even higher standard to which the people there are held. Different possible interpretations. I don't see anything specifically here in the commentaries, addressing that question, but it's an interesting one. And yeah, I think I saw Leela's comment also about the question of if we aren't in the diaspora, how do we impact the world, right? There are multiple models, right? There's an integration impact model, and then there's what sometimes is called city on a hill model, which is we build a model society in our, not enclosed, but in our particular home, and that has impact on the world through our interactions as a nation with other nations, and through our flourishing as a society and living as a society with the highest values and being a model for others. But it has pros and cons as opposed to being intermingled with the peoples across the world, and bringing our experiences or values to those more direct relationships. So I think that question about how do we achieve our mission in the world best, and what did God have in mind, quote unquote, are good questions to reflect on. Graham, go ahead.
Oh, well. Well, a question comes up for me. Do we have the right to expect or demand anything from God? Where do we get off, really? Like, okay, is God's judgment fair? It's like we're talking it's like I'm talking to you, or I'm talking to any other human being. I like, um, but if we can't, even if you take it face value, if we can't expect fairness from our fellow human beings, then the conversation stops there. But today, there seems to be a real crisis in fairness as a human expectation, which we do get to expect things from fellow human beings. But a crisis in fairness, of course, lawfulness, trust, is really like, I would say it's gone, but, there's a sort of a sense of paranoia in the air in the news. But anyway, this would be what you see on the daily feed, what they're calling now, used to be the daily news, but the daily feed. This would be a sign of things to come if we look at the daily news feed through the lens of prophecy in Ezekiel. I mean, so we got to look out. There's a warning here.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. I want to just share my screen to show Rabbi Moshe Sokolow's comment on the 929 page, which I think addresses a few of our issues and summarizes and clarifies a few things very, very well. So he's talking here about the, the metaphor of the vineyard or of the vine, of the wood of the vine. And he says the following, as Moshe Greenberg elaborated, comparison of the vine stock to Jerusalem, and here we get his comment, a surrogate for Judah/Israel. So that's a much more expansive reading of Jerusalem, as this biblical scholar Moshe Greenberg takes it. Comparison of the vine stock to Jerusalem is a grotesque distortion of the traditional use of the vine as a figure for Israel. While this figure was used in eulogistic self-description in Israel's prayers, turn and attend to this vine, right? We even describe ourselves as a vineyard in Psalms when we ask God to pay attention to us, the vine. Prophets turned it to polemical purpose. But Ezekiel's imagination seized upon an as yet unexploited aspect of the figure. Why speak of fruit at all, when the only appropriate element of comparison was the base wood of the vine, whose destiny was destruction? While the positive images belong to productive vines, our chapter, as noted, deals with a branch that had been detached from the vine and as such was unproductive. Okay, so that's an insight that we had not specifically made, that when we're talking about Eitz HaGefen, it means a detached one. So therefore, that explains its lack of productivity. Maybe it says actually something interesting if we want to take that parable further, that actually we have to be plugged in to some, whether detached from the vine means detached from God, maybe it means detached from other relationships in the world. But somehow when we lose our source of nourishment and connection to the root or to the source, then we're unproductive. Moreover, as Radak pointed out, it's inferior to other tree branches that even if they do not produce fruit, they can be put to other productive uses and made into tools or roofing for houses, while this vine cannot. As for the singeing, I said we would come back to this, or charring at its center, that was in verse 4. Radak explained, that is Jerusalem, which is in the center of the land of Israel, whose inhabitants had seen what happened, the charring, to the 10 tribes and to the other cities of Judah, the two ends, and learned no lesson from it, and were now doomed to share their fate. Right. So the reading here is that in verse 4, when we say in the parable, take this vine and imagine that it was thrown into the fire consumed its two ends, shnei kitzotav achla ha'esh, vitocho nachar, and then started to char its middle, right? That what that's describing is Jerusalem in the middle sees the burning of the two ends. That's 200 years earlier, or 100, a little less than 200 years earlier, the exile of the northern kingdom. That's one end, and then the other areas around Jerusalem, as Carl alluded to earlier, also having been destroyed, and now it's just really Jerusalem and its surrounding area, which is left, saw the burning of those other two things, didn't take heed, now itself is being burned and still doesn't learn its lesson. And that relates to the application in the end when God says, Me ha'esh yatzau v'ha'esh tochleim. They escape from fire, but fire will consume them. They escape from fire because they were not destroyed in the prior destructions, in the exile of the northern kingdom in 722, in the earlier attacks around, in Judea surrounding Jerusalem, but they didn't learn their lesson from that. So they escaped the fire, but now the fire will consume them. This reminds me a little bit, and I don't think I haven't seen anyone make this connection before, but there's often discussion about what's the source for the midrash about Abraham and the fiery furnace, right? You may know the story that it's really a two-part story. The whole question about how does Abraham come to discover God, and how does he, embark on his journey? His father Tanach has the idol store, and and Abraham destroys all the idols and leaves a hammer in the hand of one of them, and his father comes back and says, what happened? And Abraham says, they all wanted this particular offering, so they got to fighting, and the strongest one destroyed all the others. And his father says, that's absurd. They can't, idols can't move. And Abraham says, do your ears hear what your mouth is saying? And if idols can't do anything, then why do we worship them? And Terach then takes him to Nimrod and to throw him in the fiery furnace. And Abraham, emerges from the fiery furnace. But there's a second piece to that story, which is that his brother I think it's Nahor, sees what's happening and sort of says to himself, I'm going to bide my time when Avram is thrown into the fiery furnace and see, if he emerges alive, then I'll say that I'm on Avram's team. And if not, then I'll say that I'm opposed to, I don't go with the God of Abraham. And, when Avram emerges, then Nahor says, okay, I go along with Abraham, and Nimrod throws him into the fiery furnace also. And because he's not a true believer, he's just utilitarian or whatever, then he's killed there, and that explains the very end of Parshat Noach when it says, just turning there quickly. Um, uh, Sorry, it's not Nahor. It's Haran. Vayamat Haran al Pnei Terach Aviv. That it's Haran that this whole story happens to. I got that confused. So this idea of Me ha'esh yatzau v'ha'esh tochleim, they escape from fire, but fire will consume them, feels like also like a little sort of microcosm of that story. Abraham, but almost in the reverse. Abraham escapes from fire because he's a true believer. But those who don't learn the lesson, about siding with God, fire will consume them. It's not the exact same thing, but just that language of escaping from fire versus being consumed in fire. I wonder whether that parable was sort of in the back of the minds of those who created that, midrashic story about Abraham. Okay. Any last comments? Yeah, Graham.
Can I read a poem or don't?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. Here we go. God gave me a warning. He said I would burn in hell, like useless vines that bear no fruit, the way our city fell. Fruitlessness, no, fruitfulness is faithfulness, and the opposite is true. The hellfire of unfaithfulness will burn the vines that grew. False promises and my lies rise up in plumes of smoke. I cannot breathe, I cough and wheeze. On my own lies I choke. Chains of self-interest hold me tight and will not let me go. God as my judge, I cannot budge, and I am my own foe. Fruitfulness is faithfulness, and the opposite is true. The hellfire of unfaithfulness will burn the vines that grew. There's a tiger to tame, for blame is lame, once in pride and now in shame. I now will vow, though I don't know how, by God to reclaim my name.
Beautiful. Paste it on into the chat, and we'll share it with everyone. Thank you. It's certainly a rich parable, lends itself even more to expanding with poetic application. So thank you for that. Any last questions, comments, or thoughts before we wrap this short chapter up? Yep, Leela.
Could you please just say the name of the podcast that you mentioned? I'd like to follow up.
Yes, it's called the Tanach podcast. I think that's what it's called. It's probably spelled Tanakh, the Tanach podcast, and it's with Rabbi Alex Israel. And indeed, if you go on to the 929 Project website, on each chapter, on the English website for sure, on each chapter there you'll find a link to that podcast. He's got, I believe, I think every chapter of Tanakh he has. It's just like a 12 or 13-minute summary and analysis. They're wonderful. You'll also find there, I don't know if he has it for all the books of Tanakh, but you'll also find there Rabbi David Silber's, certainly on Ezekiel, on the prophets, his short podcasts, which are also fantastic. Alex Israel's are a little bit more kind of straight on the text itself and its immediate context, and is a little bit more comprehensive. Rabbi Silber will often just pick one point and goes sort of more broadly to parallels or connections across the Tanakh. But they're both terrific companions for each chapter. I'm just going to double check our schedule for next week, which should be as usual. Thursday, the 18th. Hanukkah will not deter us, but I will have Hanukkah gelt here for anyone who that's an incentive to come in person. We'll have some chocolate gelt, and we'll look forward to learning together again then. And take good care, everybody. Love to mom and dad, and great rest of the day to all. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
That's all right.
Bye.